What up, world? And welcome back to another episode of the Seeds of Success podcast. It's your host, Colin Walters, and today was a super cool episode. I had the privilege of jumping on the pod mic with my new friend and my man, Bryant Ferate. Bryant is a performance coach at the University of Portland and works with all teams, all programs there, and is all things personal development, success oriented, growth oriented. How are we getting better each day? How are we getting better each hour? How are we continuing to cast votes through action for the type of person that we want to become? Who are we becoming? Who do we want to become? These are all the types of questions that Bryant is about. And these are some of the questions that we dive into on today's podcast. If you're into personal development, if you're into just growth oriented mindset, if you're into tapping into your own calling, your own inner voice, scratching that itch for something that you've been thinking about doing and wanting to take action on, this podcast is for you. There was about an hour and a half where Bryant and I just went back and forth. We first got connected from a former player that both him and myself have coached. Shout out Henry Cheney for making the connection here. And Bryant and I's newfound friendship has been awesome. We've known each other for about 2 months, and it has felt like 2, 4, 6 years that we've known each other. And so we actually it was a super cool opportunity that we had on a Wednesday night, the night before we actually recorded this episode, that we met in person for the first time at an Oregon State University baseball game. The Portland Pilots came to town. I drove out there, connected with Bryant right before they were all jumping on the bus to head back after the game. So it was like this 9:30, 10 p.m. meeting that we finally got to dap each other up, give each other a hug, say what up, and then jump on the podcast the next day. So we're going to cut it right there. We're going to dive into the interview. We're going to dive into the podcast. I really hope that you enjoy this because it was so much fun to record. And this is only part one of probably 2, 3, and 4. So stay tuned for more. And here we go. We can roll the tape.
All right, we're live. Let's go. The first for me, at least, I don't know for you, but the first for me, the joint podcast.
Yeah.
We're going to be getting after it today. Colin, thanks for hopping on the pod. I'm stoked to be here. I'm pumped to podcast back and forth today.
Yeah, I'm as I think you could allude to, I'm just excited to dive into a meaningful conversation and build a relationship and have some fun with a conversation, man.
Yeah, totally. I feel the exact same way, dude. I feel like these past few weeks of us connecting over the phone, and I would say first time for the pod, like just by pure serendipity, we ran into each other yesterday.
Yep.
You're down just to set the table for everybody, is we've been lining up this podcast the past few weeks, and then we set this date today. It's Wednesday, May 17th.
Yep.
And then I texted Colin yesterday. I was like, dude, I'm driving down. I'm with the Portland Pilots baseball team on the bus. We're playing Oregon State in Corvallis, which we got the dub, which was sick. But the highlight was after the game, you just in the parking lot. I was like, oh, let's go.
Yeah. And so you hit me up and you said, hey, we're coming to town. And for those listening and those watching, I live in Corvallis, Oregon. And so home of the Oregon State Beavers, and it's obviously a solid baseball program, but Bryant hits me up and says that they're coming down to Corvallis. So I rearranged some plans and hit up my coach. I was supposed to have my coach come over to my house, do some bike things. And I said, hey, can we reschedule this? And he was all about it. He was just jealous that I was going to the game. And so, I went out there and was just excited to take advantage of the opportunity to come and meet you hours before our podcast here. So it's super cool how it worked out. Got to see Togs while I was out there and y'all put on a spanking too. So it was win-wins all around.
Yeah. The game was dope. Yeah. You got to see another guy. Tolia, he's from Gig Harbor, Washington. Mm-hmm. And, that was sick. I didn't even put that together. I didn't even think about that till you texted me. I was like, oh, let's go. But yeah, meet you in person. It was awesome. Like really been looking forward to this. I'm stoked to just everything we'll get into. I feel like, to be honest, when we connected over the phone, it was so many things. I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm feeling. Like, just connected on so many different things. So, one, thank you for being here. And then
Okay.
two, I'm hyped to get into this great conversation.
Me too. And I think that first and foremost, a big shout out to Henry Cheney for getting us connected here, which is, it's always cool and it's super meaningful when you have individuals that have told you that you've had an impact on their life, reach out and tell you that. And then when they can connect you with another individual like yourself who has had a similar impact on their life as a young man and in their growth and development, it's really meaningful and it's super cool. And so shout out to the Big Cheen for getting us connected here. And it's been a really, really cool and candid connection, I must say. And yeah, we definitely hit on a bunch of different levels here. So I'm excited.
Yeah, seriously, we probably just end the pod there. Just shout out Henry Cheney and then it's over.
It's over.
Yeah, I actually, speaking of Cheney, I texted him. I sent him that picture that we took before I got on the team bus.
I think it was legendary.
Yeah, I sent him that pic. I was like, yo, guess what? He's like, oh, this made my day.
Yeah.
So yeah, shout out to him. That's a you got to love people like that. I think it's such a cool, I know, at least for me, it's super fulfilling when I do that for someone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh man, you got to meet, like, you know, these two people who mean so much to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you connect them, like in a group chat or whatever, it's like every single one of those, you're like, yes,
totally.
Like that sets my heart on fire. Like it gets me fired up we recently, I was talking to Mike Rich, who's one of my best friends. He's on the pod quite a bit. We were talking about when your worlds collide. So it's like when one of your hometown buddies meets, like for me, one of my hometown buddies, Devin, met my really good buddy Deef, who's a strength coach. And like they both impacted my life so much, but they'd never met. And then we went to Austin, Texas. And I'm like, yo, this is kind of trippy. Like you don't know each other, but you both know like almost everything about me. And it's that's such a cool space when you can create that for people. So yeah, shout out Cheney. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a cool thing though, being able to be that connecting piece, especially when you know so much about those individuals as well, and know that a connection between them that they didn't even know was going to exist, right? Can then can have the ability to change their lives forever too. And then it's really cool. Like I run like a little side coaching business and work with some young professionals. And it's actually a former player of mine who I'm working with right now, and was able to connect him with one of my good friends who, is like 10 years ahead of him in his career. But just knowing, it was like that moment that just clicks in the conversation that I'm having. I'm like, you got to meet my buddy who is, some steps ahead of you, but will just be such a great connection for you to have as a mentor, as an individual, as a professional, and just as a really good person to look up to. And so they, a week later got coffee, and they both told me how cool of a connection it was. And it feels good because you feel useful and you feel valuable in those moments, and that, and it just, so yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's super cool.
That's sick. Yeah. Side coaching, huh? I was about to say, I was going to ask, where'd you want to start with this? But dude, you got so many hustles, not even side hustles, like not even adding the side, like they're all the hustle with like the Airbnbs, BSN. That's a BSN, right? Is that
super close. Just one letter off. BPN, Bear Performance Nutrition. And I'm an ambassador for Bear Performance Nutrition based out of Austin, Texas. So hands down, like one of the best communities, one of the best families that you could be involved with, just like hungry go-getters in the health and fitness space, but also just like super growth oriented, personal development oriented, just good people to be around. And so that's a cool community. And but yeah, what did you have anything specific about the coaching that you wanted to ask?
I mean, we can get into that. I think that's one thing we connected on when we first spoke on the phone, was just like having not so many things going on, but it was like, oh yeah, like I guess setting the table for myself. It's like we were talking about like running and fitness and investing in our health. And then I was like, oh dude, you got a podcast, like Seeds of Success podcast? I'm like, yo, let me check this out. And then when I was listening to the pod, and I'm like, oh dang, he's on YouTube. And then I was like, yo, he's doing like 90 days in a row, posting videos and Transformation Tuesday and just like so many different things and then like even in your Instagram bio, you got the Airbnbs, right?
Mm,
Like
yeah. Try
and
to sneak
I'm
it in
like,
there.
yeah. And I'm like, oh man, like I was like, dude, let's go. And like, I feel the same. Like in some ways, some people always tell me, they're like, oh man, you got so much going on. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, I never really looked at it like that. I'm just like, I'm super curious and I'm super passionate. But
Yeah.
I guess, dude, I'd love to start with the podcast. I mean, that's the big thing of,
That's like our number one common ground, I feel like. So let's
yeah.
start
So
there.
yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, man. I was honestly, I'm super curious about this. I just listened to your recent two,
Mm-hmm.
summarizing the marathon, which is another thing we got to get into.
Yeah.
But I was really curious, what drew you to the podcast space, or
Mm.
like what fills your cup in like fulfillment in that regard.
Well, I think it comes back to the first thing that you and I connected on that first phone call that we had, which is living into a calling, right?
Mm,
I think I continue to learn that whether I have one calling, maybe I'll figure that out here at some point, but I feel called to do different things in life. And the amount of times that people have told me to use my voice, or like that word voice, it just is, it's a powerful word, and it's something that I could go through my notes on my Apple phone and just show you, like, I document it all. Anytime somebody has ever told me, hey, you got a great voice for radio. Hey, you got a great voice for, broadcasting, or you have a whatever it is, like I document it, man. There's only so many times that you can document this thing without knowing that is like something that you need to do. And like back in college, ran like radio station and had a buddy that we did like a sports talk radio. And so it's always
no
like,
way.
I
That's
initially went
sick.
to school for sports broadcasting. One reason or another, it didn't pan out. I totally transitioned and went sport management and Spanish. But I was just interested in those things. And, long story short is like the podcast just felt, it was something that I always wanted to do. I felt like I had a calling to use my voice in some capacity. And I started it during COVID when we're in home all the time. And I had talked about doing the podcast before. I had told people that I wanted to start a podcast. And then I got to a point where I was just tired of saying that I wanted to do this thing.
Mm.
And I just freaking got a USB mic actually, I was going to say that I opened the box for it, but honestly, that's not the truth. That box sat unopened for probably like, I don't know, 4 weeks, 5 weeks or something, until one day I'm like, dude, how about we just open the box? And it was like, Brian, it's funny. It's like one of those things where I was starting to get overwhelmed, maybe thinking about like the whole, like building this huge podcast, or
Yeah.
building this thing that seemed overwhelming at the time when I had never hit record and I had never recorded an episode. And so one day I looked at it and I'm like, you know what? How about we just start with one simple, small step and open the box? And opening the box and then holding it in my hand, it was like, it was like voice was ringing in my head, and like all those conversations of people telling me that I'd be really good at this. And it was like this super cool moment to like really feel the power of the microphone, like in my hand. I'm like, okay, it's time to do something with this now. So I like plugged it in and I downloaded Anchor, and I went, what did I do? I went into my room and closed the door and just hit record and just got the first episode out of the way, which is like an intro episode. I think I actually wrote down I'm not one for usually like writing out a full script or anything. Like I'll write maybe out a couple bullet points or something, but yeah, I'll just but I remember I was like, I wanted it to be somewhat polished and have, a good message of what is the podcast going to be about. And so it took some time for me to actually critically think, okay, let me take a step back and actually think, what do I want the podcast to be about? So it was like that getting over the initial hurdle and hump of getting started, I think was like, one of the biggest challenges initially. But then once I wrote that out, I was like, you know what? It's good enough. I'm not going to overthink this thing. I'd done that for too long. So I was like, this thing's good enough, man. I'm just going to, I wrote it out, hit record, and episode 1 was recorded. I recorded 2 more after that. I think in like a span of, I don't know, like 2 or 3 weeks or something. And then a year and a half went by and I hadn't recorded one until it was time to pick up the microphone again and hit record. And then at that point in time, I was committed to this thing this time around. And this was back in last August, I want to say. So, and then I made a commitment to do this thing for a decade and put out a podcast a week for a decade. So that's my commitment. That is public. I don't know what episode it is, maybe episode 12, 13, something like that. But I talked about the 10-year commitment. And so getting back to your question, why the podcast? I know it's within my realm of passion for speaking and passion for delivering value in a way that I think is in line with my natural skill sets and abilities. And similar to you, I just really cherish and value meaningful connection. And I think that the podcast brings that out of you and brings that out of people. And you mentioned in your previous episode on your 1-year anniversary, like just the ability for the interviewees to even learn more about themselves, I think is a super cool concept. And so the fact that you can have these conversations that require more of you in the moment, I think is super powerful as well. And there's so many things that go into it. And at the end of the day, I just enjoy it too. So if I wasn't enjoying it, I wouldn't be doing it. That I'll tell you first and foremost, Totally. So if I wasn't loving it, I wouldn't be doing it. Yeah. Hell. Why you? Why you with the podcast?
Yeah, dude, I had a similar experience that we talked about, but it was I've always loved podcasting. Like that was my I remember even back like not too long ago, but like 2017, when I first moved to Portland, I would watch Mariners games on mute and I would listen to a podcast.
Podcasting. Oh my God. Cool.
Yeah. And it was
like
just
two of your favorite things combined right there.
Yeah. And it was just like, that's how I like relaxed in the evenings. Like when people are like, oh, do you watch a show or a TV or whatever? Or like I'd go for walks, and I mean, I walk quite a bit or I'll run quite a bit without headphones.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I'm like, if I'm driving, I'd rather listen to a podcast than music. And I just like, I just love learning. And that it was, I think really early on, I remember back, like, I think this was summer 2013. Like podcasts weren't as big then. And I remember listening to like Barbell Shrugged podcast and like Tim Ferriss podcast a little bit, but I wasn't like, I was still trying. I'm like, what is this? Like, I'm not 100% sure. So I remember when I moved to Kentucky, I was like by myself driving across the United States, and I was going to intern out there, and I listened to podcast. And that was kind of the beginning where I'm like, yo, these people are on my team. Like these, like I hang out with these people all the time.
Totally.
And I'd always had that similar experience where people are like, whoa, man, you got a deep voice. Like you should be an announcer for a game, or you should be sports broadcasting or whatever. And honestly, that never really resonated with me. Like I didn't want to be like and now standing at 6'5". Like I wanted to be coaching. Like I want to interact with people. I don't want to just announce like where they're from or what happened in the game. Like no knock on that. I just knew like I wanted to be more involved.
Yeah, use your voice differently to connect in different ways.
Yeah, and be involved in sport to connect with people. And then I honestly ran into the same thing. I'm like, oh, it'd be sick to have a podcast. Like that'd be cool. Like whatever. And then during COVID, I listened to this podcast with Tim Ferriss, and I'm blanking on his name right now. I'll put it in the show notes, but it was this podcast of like, how would you start a podcast if you were to start right now? And they were like, oh, I'd buy like the USB Audio Technica, like $99 USB mic, which I actually like right after that podcast, I bought 2 of them. And then I bought the H6 like handy recorder and the XLR cables, and I bought it all. And then I was like, well, shoot, like I'm starting. Like, here we
God,
go.
and
And like,
I was stressed out about my one USB mic to plug in to
yeah,
my
well,
computer. I didn't even know what an XLR cable was at that moment in time.
yeah. So I ordered all that, and then I was like, damn, like, what am I going to start recording in person
Yeah,
episodes? And I
yeah.
was like, well, you can't really. I was like, oh, you shouldn't record it in person if you're not doing video. And then just honestly, like, there was this push from this. I mean, it was like kind of three things. It was like the push for me, like I felt so drawn to doing it. And I was just like, all right, I don't know what name it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I might as well just make it my name
Mm-hmm.
because I'm the only one if you Google me.
Yep.
And then two, I'm like, okay, no intro music. I might not even do an intro. Like, I don't know how to do it. Like, I just got to
Mm-hmm.
get the reps and put the episodes out there.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it was like, I talked about this on some previous episodes, but I just looked up to like some amazing people like Chris Williamson from the Modern Wisdom podcast. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like not a knock on, I was just not a knock on them of like, wow, I think I could do that. Like, not in an easy way, in like a, wow, I feel like that guy's only 4 years ahead of me.
Yeah. What in
And
like an inspired way, like
totally.
there.
Yeah.
And I think what you said it right there is so powerful. Like looking up to those individuals, whatever capacity of life, whether it's the podcast or work or career or fitness or whatever. Just like I used to really look up to like, business world, like the Grant Cardones or the Zig Ziglars, like, Jim Rohns and like all these, Ed Milet's like super successful. And then I started really being inspired by the people, like you just said, that are a couple steps ahead, right?
Totally.
Because it seems attainable and achievable in that moment. And then like, those steps are going to continue building until you ultimately get up to those individuals, that you're looking up to on an even higher pedestal, if you will. But yeah, I think that's super important. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to emphasize that point because I think it comes with like, for me, like I never thought about it that way until I started hearing people speak about it in that way. And then it just made a lot of sense to me. So then I started, like you mentioned that how I have a YouTube, like, I think my 162 subscribers is like astronomical from where I started with 3, but it's like, I'm trying to emulate. I'm now researching and learning from the people that have 1,000 subscribers and 2,000 subscribers. It's like the ones that have the 500,000 and million plus. I'm like, that I just am not even, it would be more effective for the use of my time and commitment to learning and education to really try to get up to that 1,000 mark right there and emulate what they're doing. So I just totally agree with what you just said.
Yeah, it's like that thing by Dickie Bush. He's the writer that for Ship 30 for 30, but he talks about it's like the 2-year model. Like you want to write about things for the person who's maybe 2 years behind you.
Yeah.
And then you want to write about the things you wish to learn or know in the next 2 years. And then you're learning from people who are like 2 or 4 years ahead of you.
That's great.
And then, yeah, and that's something that I was going to say about on top of Chris Williamson was Danny Miranda, like the Danny Miranda podcast, which like, I'm like, dang, okay, this guy's a few years younger than me. Every podcast I listen to this guy, I'm like, yo, that's what I was about to ask. Like, because I think when I listen to podcasts, I'm like, okay, I hope they ask this because this is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And he would do that a lot. And I just carve up his episodes. And then, yeah, just through like even the podcast, it was sick. Like, I ended up talking to him on the phone for like an hour back in, I think, June of 2022. It's like right when I started the podcast, like 2 months in, we like end up talking on the phone and I was asking him about the podcast. And it was like a big moment for me because I'm just like, yo, like I can do this too. Like, not that it's, and the best part about podcasting is like it's not a competition. Like I'm not trying to be better than his podcast. Like it's like I'm rooting for your podcast. Like I hope your podcast crushes it. Like I actually I left you a review today, and I was like, oh, he's at like you're at 27 5-star reviews, and I was like, nice, dude, I'm number 27, and clicked it, and it's like I want you to get as many. It's a positive sum game, and yeah, Danny Miranda and Chris Williamson were 2 really big ones because it's like you look at Joe Rogan. I'm like, oh, I want to be like Joe Rogan. It's like, okay, I got to get like 3K or 2K episodes And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, it starts with one, or it starts with opening the box, like what you said, or it starts with me. I was going to say the last part. My third kind of component was I bought Riverside, and I'm like, okay, it'll be way easier if I block out time and do it virtually, like what we're doing. And then I used it kind of like as a voice, or like the sign was so many people were like, oh, you should do this, oh, you should do this. And then I started turning it into a game where I was like, all right, man, every single time someone says that, like, you got to do it, it's another vote. Like when people are like, hey man, you got an announcer voice, you should. And I'm like, I got to start a podcast, to the point where
what was your tipping point?
I think that listening to that podcast on the Tim Ferriss one with all this stuff, I was like, dude, I can do this, let's go. And I think it was like, I think that was the tipping point, because I'm like, okay, he just gave me a list of stuff I need to buy. I just need to buy it. Like, oh, it cost me like $400 like total.
Yeah,
and it's actually funny. I got these like nice Shure mics now.
Yeah.
And it was funny because there was like a sale, and so I emailed Amazon and was like, hey, like, is there any way? And they're like, yeah, go for it. So that was like, all right, now I'm extra committed. I'm getting the damn good mics instead of And then it was actually funny. There's this guy at jiu-jitsu. He'd call me Baritone. Like, I don't think he knows my name, but every time he'd walk in, he'd be like, oh, Baritone, what's up, man? And
just from the voice.
And then in jiu-jitsu, I was like, dude, I'm going to start a podcast. Like, in my head, I'm like, I'm going to start a podcast. And the next time he calls me that, I'm like, dude, I actually got one. You want to check it out? And now it's a new challenge. Like, a lot of people will be like, oh, dang, man, you got it. And I'm like, oh, dude, I'll text you the link. Like, what's your cell phone number? And I'll just text them my Spotify link. I'm like, you should check out the pod. I do have a podcast. So that's kind of the evolution of like of where I started.
You bring up Danny Miranda, and I mean, he has no idea who I am, but I very well know who he is because of you, because that was the episode I had a training run. I think I was a 16-mile training run. I remember it so vividly, putting on that episode with you and Danny, and that was my whole run. Basically, I think I had a couple miles after it finished, but then I started checking out Danny Miranda's podcast, and I really appreciated it, because it's like turning your hobby right into like, hey, I want to make something out of this, and so like to hear him start from interest and hobby to like, hey, I'm going to put out an episode and I'm committing to this Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Right. And put out, I think you said like a tweet a day and a reel a day, or something along those lines. But I remember just being like inspired. I'm like, you can just really take that thing that you feel called to do, and you can go make it something by commitment and public announcement, and really just taking it, taking it seriously. And it was so, yeah, man, I thought it was super cool to hear. And I just, yeah, man, I listened to that episode twice now.
Hell yeah. Dude, that's, I've listened to it a bunch. That's one of my favorite episodes of all time, just because that was just surreal for me, where I'm like, dude, like it's like hard to express. Like, I'm like, dude, I've never met you. Like, cool. I'm, like, it's like, hey, I've never met you before. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Like, thanks for calling me. And like, I always try to hit them up of podcasts that I enjoy. And then it's just like, dude, you've helped me a ton without realizing it. It's that David Senra from Founders Podcast.
Yeah, I saw him in your newsletter.
Yeah. And he and Sam Parr just were talking about like podcast affinity and the parasocial relationship, where it's that's something I think is so cool. And it's so cool when people put words to things that you feel, but I don't know, like, I didn't know that was a word. Maybe I missed the boat here on SAT words or something, but it's like a parasocial relationship.
Unless you and I both missed it, and I was just extremely tuned out in my learning abilities. I think I missed it too.
But then it's this idea of, and when they explain it, I'm like, I agree. I love that. And it's you develop this one-sided relationship, like, because you're with them so often and you hear their voice. And the podcast is so unique compared to like reading a book or taking an online course. It's like David Senra and Founders Podcast, or Sean Puri and Sam Parr on My First Million. It's like, I listen to those guys like I listen to their podcast on 1.2 speed because I want to like sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
Where other podcasts I'll listen at like 1.5, but it's like I listen to those guys 2 to 3 hours a week in my headphones. And that process of podcast affinity or parasocial relationship is like, how many people can we say in our lives that we listen to without distraction for multiple hours in a week?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a short list, you know? Like even people we interact with every day, like I might interact with them every day, but I don't spend 3
consecutive hours.
Yeah. Or it's like Monday's an hour, Wednesday's an hour, Friday's an hour, but my headphones are in and I'm walking in my neighborhood or I'm driving in the car.
Tuned in. And I was reflecting on you saying that, like, and going back to your initial question of why the podcast. And because I have found so much value in podcasts in my life, I felt like it was a very natural way for me to also be able to give back and, you know, hopefully provide value for others in their life. And I'm sure you know the feeling of getting that text or that comment from somebody who you had no clue was listening. And you're like, no way, like you listened to my podcast and it helped you? Dude, it's a really cool thing. And so, yeah, I just, you know.
Yeah. Hurts dude, I'm smiling so hard. It hurts my face when you say that. Cause it's like, I'm the same. I'm like, you actually listen?
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't believe you do.
I couldn't believe that people listen as often as they do. It makes that much more meaningful. And honestly, it has continued to create more like a greater sense of drive and motivation for me as well, because 100%. I'm like, cool, can't let the people down now, you know, like
massive flywheel.
Building
it's just like
community. Totally.
Yeah. The more you do it, the harder it's spinning. Like
It's like momentum, you know, it's like once you have it, keep it going. Totally. You know? Yeah.
Are there any, I was going to ask you from like a podcast skill standpoint.
Yeah.
Is there any like skill you're really working on now?
That's a good question. What I am really trying to hone in on is the entire process of being able to effectively and efficiently create a podcast, a reel, and a YouTube video simultaneously. And so what I mean by that is recording the episode, capturing the video and the audio, and then getting into Premiere Pro and being able to edit it. And because I have found a pretty good process. Basically, I'll go through and I will be very intentional on going through the edit the first time and trying to find those key moments that I can spin up into a 30 to 60 second reel. And then I will try to like copy and paste those into my next little sequence that I'm building. Premiere Pro has been such a learning curve for me. And so that in itself is like been a total time. I got super fortunate. I have a friend here who does Premiere Pro. He's like has his own media company. So, you know, I have worked with him tremendously and learned so much from him here in just in Corvallis, like just meeting up, you know, after hours and everything to try to learn as much as I can. But yeah, like that process of like sifting out and finding these cuts and these edits in the entire podcast that I can use in a reel. And then at the same time, like, how can I quickly get the podcast out and get it ready for publish and scheduled? But also at the same time, like, build the YouTube video at the same time while continuing to improve it all. So it's this fine line of how can I be most effective and efficient with my time to being able to create and produce mass content at scale while doing a lot of other things in life. I feel like is kind of the struggle, and like the thing that I'm working on right now is how to do those. And so I think like that's kind of where I'm at, because then, you know, that shifts into marketing the podcast, that shifts into continuing to build the brand and build the platform on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the podcast platforms, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, like everything. So it's like, that's really what I'm focusing on right now from like an actual system standpoint. And then in the actual podcast, like is always continuing to ask better questions, I think is like like a very podcast specific skill that I'm working on.
How do you ask better questions?
Number one is research. So continuing to learn as much as I can about, if I'm having somebody come onto the podcast, learn about them, and so that I can ask more specific questions that are tailored to them. And then also, not trying to reinvent the wheel. And when I find a good question that I like, whether it was listening to a podcast or reading somebody's newsletter or, just in everyday life, jotting that question down and then using that in the podcast. So I think those are like two ways that come to mind, that are top of mind. So yeah. And anything from that, or like, what are you working on podcast wise?
Yeah, I think, I'm right there with you of just like asking better questions. And I've really attached like listening to that, which I know I get like excited. I'm like, oh, and then it's like, all right, dude, chill out. Like, but it's excited in a good way, not to chill out, but it's like, all right, I'm really excited about this. And it's just like really like listening to what the guest is saying. And it's like that poll. It's like something I heard from Danny Miranda is like, and it's something I've tried to embody is like, I want the guest of the podcast to learn something about themselves. And I want them to discover something about themselves throughout the podcast. And it's like, but you got to do that genuinely, like going into the episode. If that's the goal, like it's kind of hard to do it. It's, you got to do it in another way by just like being really curious. So I think really to just think like deeply listening, and not doing too much research. I think sometimes, like, I think the research part is fun because people are like, oh, how do you prep? And I'm like, oh, it's easy. You just listen to all their stuff, which I already love doing. Yeah. So it's like, I think one area that I've tried to get a lot better, and it's what you and I did, but I've thought about, okay, I love podcasts and I get a little nervous like right before it starts. So think about the people who like agree to be on it that don't love podcasts. And it's like, I didn't want my podcast to be scripted. Like I didn't want it to be like, hey man, I'm going to ask you these 10 questions. If you just fill it out on a piece of paper before, you can just read them off while we're doing it. And I didn't want it to be like that. So in the beginning, I'd be like, hey, here's 5 things that I like would like to talk about. And I realized it didn't really prep the guest very well. So something I've tried to do is just be like, hey, here are some things that I really want to discuss. This is what I'm thinking about the podcast. Also, these aren't in order, but just like things to think about. And then, is there anything you're really curious about, or anything that's like really like lighting you on fire that you really want to talk about? And is there anywhere that you'd like to start? And I've tried to do that, and I don't know if that 100%. I feel like it's working a little bit better, but it's trying to make them more comfortable. Lex Friedman had this thing when he, I think he sat down. It was either Bology, the 8-hour podcast episode, or he had, maybe it was Rick Rubin, but it was like 2 hours in, and I think Rick Rubin was like, I forgot the mics were here. And it took him 2 hours. And like Rick Rubin's like been behind a mic his whole life, but I can't remember. I know it was Lex Friedman, but I can't remember what episode. But they talked about like forgetting that you're on a computer, right? Forgetting, it's like pretty hard to forget that you're on like a Riverside FM right now. But those are the things that I've been working on. I don't necessarily know the exact, like, it's not as easy as like, hey, I'm going to go run like zone 2 work, but those are some things that I've been working on, is just listening and trying to create this like really special place where like, I hope at the end of this, you're like, oh man, I forgot we were on. Oh, it's like, oh shoot, I'm like sitting in this, like my office or studio. Like I'm sitting in the rec center right now. There's like a really nice conference room that it's got a decent backdrop and some good internet. So, but I want to, my goal for myself, I guess, is have an amazing conversation, but forget that I'm in this room, because this is so special with you. And so those are some things that I've thought about in regards to skills of podcasting.
Yeah, I think that you and I are in a similar boat in the sense that nothing has ever been scripted from a conversation standpoint when bringing guests onto the podcast. However, I definitely have given like, hey, here's 5 or 6 questions just to get them like thinking, about the topics that I want to discuss. Like, I would say that I have had specific topics for individuals, or like, hey, like I want you to come share your story about how you got started as a business owner. And then for the audience, so while always trying to bring it back to the audience too, so that, they're the ones listening, so that they can get value from the conversations that we're having as well. So it's kind of this like fine line of being super genuine and authentic in the conversation while still being able to maintain a direction for the conversation to go, and being able to organically steer that ship, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
While
100%.
also like delivering value to the audience that is taking time out of their day to listen. And I think it's gotten good. And over time, I'll say like, hey, Bryant, here's like, 5 questions or 5 bullet points of, some topics that we can dive into. More likely than not, we'll hit on 2 or 3 of them, and the conversation will go, in a certain direction, and we can just totally roll with that. But my intention is to at least get them thinking like within that realm of, here is like overarching theme of what I think they are super specialized to talk about, and then can deliver the most value to the audience. Is kind of how I've thought about it in my very, limited time here running a podcast. So yeah, I don't know if like you can, I think you can somewhat relate to that. I know that you and I, when we first connected over the phone, we both jotted down some different bullet points. I feel like you and I could, shoot it from the hip for a while, just because we speak a lot of the same languages. So, but yeah, so that's kind of how I think about the actual structure of these conversations that we're having on the podcast.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed, the impact in like your day-to-day life? So like not behind the mic.
Oh
like,
my gosh.
Yeah. Let's hear. I'm curious.
To your point, like being a better listener, I think is the first and foremost. And then being able to ask more thought-provoking questions in just very normal conversations, I think are 2 skills that just go hand in hand with what we actually do on a podcast. And I mean, I work in sales also. And so it ties directly into what I do on a like day-to-day professional career standpoint as well. And so it ties very nicely into becoming a better listener, asking more thought-provoking questions, being able to, focus on organic conversations while continuing to deliver value, or like intentions that I have going into conversations. And just day-to-day life, like, yeah, I listen to so many podcasts that my mind is always thinking, "Oh, that's good. Like, I'm going to incorporate that into my podcast." Or, "Oh, that was a good question," or "That was interesting. Let me think about, how can I incorporate that into my own." So, going back to one of your episodes with, I think it was the same one with Danny, but just like listening and kind of walking through a critiquing process of like how to continue improving the podcast. And I think that from a day-to-day standpoint, like kind of that structure that I was talking about with like how to effectively and efficiently create a system for producing the podcast, YouTube, and short form content at the same time has helped my brain think in similar ways for going about different processes for normal things in life too, work related, fitness related, side business stuff related. So kind of just like a continued framework for developing similar practices across the broad spectrum of life, I would say as well. Yeah,
that's really cool.
That's a really good question though. How has becoming a podcast host impacted you in your personal life?
Yeah, I've really been thinking about this with Chris Williamson had talked about it was like everyone should try recording themselves or recording a conversation for just 30 minutes, like once a week. And he's like, it doesn't matter. You don't have to post it. And I'd already started the podcast, but I appreciated what he said was it like gives you some kind of accountability because you're like, wow, this is being recorded, and not in like a uptight way. You're just like, okay, like I got to kind of mean this, or at least own it, and then be like, all right, actually. But it makes you come to play by. And that's something I've appreciated with the mic. I thought people would be more nervous, and a lot more people are like, well, if this thing's on, I gotta like say something good. And not that they're like lying, they're just like, well, all right, I'm going to put my heart out there and tell this story, or I'm going to tell this thing that I've had people say stuff, and I've tried to get better at when people say hard things. I'm like my first response, I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry. Like, but it's like, they don't need, like, they don't want me to, you know what I mean? Like they're not telling me that because they want me to say sorry, but I'm like trying to be like, I'm a compassionate person. So I'm like, oh man,
Yeah,
but
you're
it's
also human.
Yeah, and it's like in a one-off conversation, they're probably not going to tell me that, but they did over the mic when it was recorded. Like, so I would say that is one area I've gotten way more used to, like hearing my own voice and hearing like my little like things I'm working on. Like I'm always like, oh, that's sick. Like, or my like I know my student athletes could do some pretty good impersonations of me, and so could some of my friends. Like I know I have some like quirky tendencies, and so it's like hearing those on the podcast. I'm like there was one podcast I did that it was just funny listening to it back because I was like, wow, dude, you got to stop doing that when it's recording. And then I was like, I wonder if I do that normally. And I like was kind of more observant, and I was like, wow, I totally do that. And people will like say stuff that's cool, and I'm like, wow, that's sweet. And I just kept saying that, and I'm like, dude, like, and that's like the evolution of me being a better podcaster. And then just in the day to day, I'm like, how can I say other things, right? Maybe, and then it's not just this. It feels like it's like a nervous tick when people are like, "What's up?" or they like don't know what to. They just have that same thing they always say. But yeah, I think in another way too is it's something I've thought about a lot this year. But it's like the richness of our life is determined by the questions we choose to ask, and that's something I've thought about not only in the podcast space but in my day to day, like. Not to beat a dead horse with Danny Miranda, but he's really inspired me. And there was a part where I told him this on episode 20 actually, and he didn't remember. And then when I said it, he was like, "Oh," but it was that people asked him, "How do you prepare for a podcast?" And he said like he does research, blah blah blah. And then there was this part where he's like, "My life is a podcast, just sometimes it's recorded." And that was something like I try to think about. It's like, okay, basically I'm always on a podcast because I'm trying to have deep, meaningful connections and like amazing conversations and be as present as possible and maximize out my curiosity and like just celebrate people. Just sometimes, and honestly, the most of the time, the mic's not on. And I'm like, cool, I'm down with living that kind of life. So that's something that I've just been thinking about. And then when I get on here, like with you, like not gonna lie, like when we were starting, I'm like, oh man, I'm getting kind of nervous, like getting the keyboard going. And I'm like, but nervous and I'm excited. Like I'm excited for the opportunity. And that's one way, not to go on too big of a rant, but that's one way I think about life is I'm just like, all right, like I got to ask good questions. I got to be a good listener. I got to tell like really good stories and not like over exaggerate, but like I can tell it in a way where it's going to impact you for the rest of your life or maybe the next year or whatever, instead of me just telling you like, cool, peace. And then it's over. Like, so those are some ways that I've really tried to keep that top of mind and just like implement that every day.
Well, I enjoy what you say because it's quite frankly just living with intention, in your everyday communication, relationship building, like that's just showing up to with purpose for how you want that interaction to be and what you want to get out of that, speaking with that person, which, and building that relationship with them. I think it's super cool. It's kind of like living with, how they say like, the camera's on when nobody's around, sort of living. It's like that same intention. Like, what are you doing when the camera's not on, when the mic is not, in your face? But something to be said about the microphone, and like coming onto the podcast. And I think it is a platform that does challenge us, and you are having to be vulnerable and put yourself out there because people are going to listen. And, it's one thing to start getting over hearing your own voice. It's another thing to hear those little idiosyncrasies that you have, that's cool, and the ums and the ahas, and, and like all those little things that we don't notice in everyday life. My first time ever learning about those things was when I went through Toastmasters some years back, and having it be recorded and then listening to it back, it's pretty cringeworthy at first. And then, but it's the fact of you putting yourself out there in the first place is a step of growth. You being able to stand there and then deliver in front of people is another step of growth. And then to listen to it back and then actually apply what you're learning and becoming more conscious about what you're saying and how you're listening and how you're wanting to show up, I think it's super powerful because we choose to do this. And I think that anybody that does show up to the podcast, or anybody in general that shows up to their work call, or shows up to their study session, or shows up to, whatever they have going on in work, life, personal, professional things, like just showing up to whatever you are being, demanded to do in that moment, I think is going to continue to build people up. But it's like comes back full circle to what you were saying about having the intentions with it too. What are you trying to get out of it? Where, we're showing up to this to, continue developing a relationship, have a super cool conversation, and hopefully inspire some people and bring value to their lives while we're doing that is part of my intentions in showing up today. Which is literally what I was saying to myself as I was listening to your podcast 20 minutes before, getting in the right mindset, walking around the block saying, I'm ready to show up to have a great conversation and connect deeply here with Bryant. So like just spot on. And I hope that people can like go and apply that of living with intention and showing up with intention to however that means in their own life who are listening.
Yeah. And even I love that you said that, because it's like even just a small step. It's like you don't have to grill people with like podcast questions. You know, it's like I think about that richness of our life, or the experience, like the richness of the experience in our life is determined by the question we choose to ask. Even like is like going to a coffee shop, and instead of saying like, "Hey, I'll take a cold brew," it's like, "Hey, like what have you been up to for fun?" Mm-hmm. Or it's like it doesn't have to be podcast questions. It could simply be like, even like, are you down in Corvallis and like you go, like you connect with somebody and just like, oh, like what made you move here? Like, and it's like you don't have to have these like crazy like Tim Ferriss, Rich Roll, like the pinnacle of podcast. You don't have to be podcasting people all the time. It's just like being willing to be like, okay, I'm going to change the trajectory of this conversation, instead of just like, hey, what's up? Cool. Yeah. How's it going? Good. All right. Peace. And you're like,
it's making people feel heard and seen.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So true. You said something about Toastmasters. Was there anything like that contradicted each other from Toastmasters to podcasting that you've noticed? Or like maybe it was like it's big in the podcast space, but Toastmasters like, nah, we don't really do that. Or
have
like
you ever done Toastmasters?
No, I've only seen like videos of it.
Oh wow, have you thought about it? I feel like you'd be pretty prime for it.
I mean, I've looked it up. Like when I first moved to Portland, I was trying to find like stuff where and then I was trying to like build community. So like I was trying to meet people and stuff, and I'd looked into it, but I've never tried it.
Oh yeah. If you ever get the opportunity, definitely try it. It's hands down the best personal development program I've ever been a part of. And yeah, you gotta, differences between podcast and Toastmasters. Well, one, the majority of podcasts that I've done, I hope to get in person, but the majority of them are you in a room with a computer. So I think that is one aspect of the difference between Toastmaster and podcast. But yeah, Toastmaster, getting up on stage and presenting in front of a room of individuals who you are the sole focus of everything going on. I think it's something to be said in itself. And, and you are trying to deliver a some sort of a story or some form of a presentation live and in front of a room. And so, yeah, it's going to force you to get up. And for that, you definitely want to be prepared. I spent a lot of time preparing for those ones. But it is an exhilarating feeling. And that's something where I'm like, okay, how do I take some of those, and apply it to my life now, able to do that on an everyday basis. And so like podcast was like perfectly suited for that. But yeah, there are a lot of good skills and highly encourage anybody thinking about Toastmasters to jump in. And yeah, it's a awesome program.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
That's sick.
Yeah. Hey, I got a question for you. And
yeah, let's go.
So you obviously have a lot going on in your life, right? How do you go? I'm so curious about how you get out your newsletter on a consistent basis with getting out the podcast, with your work life, with training, with coaching, with everything that you got going on. How are you structuring your days and your weeks in order to effectively and consistently get your newsletter out? Because I love reading it and I look forward to it every week.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
But how do you what is your process for going about consistently getting that out while you have everything else going on in your life?
Yeah, actually, such a good question. You were like reading my mind. It's something hopefully it's going to change. It's going to change, not hopefully. It's going to change, but in a really great way. Something that I've just been thinking about a lot. There's been a couple things. So one, just like this will set the table. So James Clear, he used to spend like 40 hours a week writing 2 newsletter posts, or some like ridiculous amount of research. That's like
an insane amount of time for
insane.
Wow.
Yeah, and I might be off of that a little bit, but it was like or it was like 20.
Get the point.
It was a lot. And then he realized that I heard this on a podcast. I'm pretty sure it was Tim Ferriss, or most recent Tim Ferriss podcast, or it was like the High Performance podcast. I think they're from England. But he was talking about, he'd asked himself, how would I write this if I only had 30 minutes? And then he started like force functioning him down to writing it in 30 minutes, and everyone liked it more. And he was like, oh, well, shoot, like what was what is this thing? And so then I've been thinking about like, okay, like that's why I kind of changed the newsletter. So most recently I'd been writing like on one topic, and it'd be kind of long, which some of them are long now, but I switched it to the Ferate 5. So it's like 5 things I can't stop thinking about. And it will just be once a week, 5 things. And I was like, okay, this is way easier because I learned more than 5 things in a week. Like there was more than 5 things in my brain that I can't stop thinking about.
And are you jotting those down during the week, or do you have a dedicated time where you sit down and write these 5 things out?
Oh, no. I'm like, okay, so more and more in life, I'm realizing that I'm a weirdo in a good way.
That's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. So, like flying my freak flag, it's, I'm like, I'll like do stuff and I'll like trick myself because I'm like, oh, I thought everybody did this. And, no, I started realizing, I'm like, okay, so Billy Oppenheimer, I've been hyping this dude up because I just love everything he posts, but he's Ryan Holiday's research assistant.
Got it.
And he has been putting out his newsletter. It's 6 at 6, which everyone should subscribe to. His is sick, but he has these like common threads. So there's some weeks where I'll do just like 5 things that have nothing to do with each other. And then there's other ones, like I came out with one today, and it's the win is in the work. And it was
like a
this
theme.
idea. Yeah, it was a theme, the through line or the thread, the common thread.
Yeah.
And so just throughout the week, I stole this from, it's a lot of shout outs. Like literally all these people just like changed my life. Like,
wasn't this how it works? You pull things from different people, and you pull things from different sources about how these people are doing it effectively and so successfully. And then you just recreate it to make it your own.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, I just feel like I'm hanging out with them all the time. Like Zach Pogrub, he's blew up on social media. Like he has he was the first guy to do those like black and white, super simple, like 15-second videos. And then everybody copied him on social media. His big thing is like obsession. And he's actually the background of my phone, which was the whole thing with Danny Miranda.
Yeah.
Because that's his homie. I was like, oh,
Oh,
dude, it's my
that's right.
background.
Yeah.
So, but
that tweet.
long story short, he talks about blocking off your months and then you just take these long notes. So then like I have them. So I have like May, and then I look through my Notion of all of my notes and I type in everything in the same note tab of things I learn on podcasts or bullets. I timestamp everything, and not everything. It's like I listened to one podcast. It was like 2 hours long. And I only had like 2 bullets. Everything. I was like, I'm entertained, but there was nothing that I'm like, oh, I got to remember that. So I put all that in Notion, and it's just stuff. And then like if I'm bored, I've tried to, instead of looking at, Pogrub talks about this and a few other creators, but it's like instead of going on Instagram, I just go through that note tab and I just read the stuff that I thought was cool. And it's the stuff I thought was cool. It's like the best social media. It's like it's my Twitter, like not me scrolling through Twitter. I'm scrolling through my own notes tab of stuff that I've found that I thought was cool. And so then I have all that, and then I tried to apply that to the James Clear thing of like, okay, if I only had like an hour, how would I write this newsletter?
So and was that the question that you specifically asked yourself in order to change the structure and the format of your newsletter?
Yeah, it's kind of like I can't remember the exact, it's like a mental model. It's like if you give however much time you give something, and that's how long it's going to take.
Yeah, Parkinson's law.
Yeah. Or it's like we're all water. Like whatever shape that you give yourself, like water is going to take up that shape. So it's like something I've one habit that I'm working on that I haven't done the best of is writing for 15 minutes every day. That's something I haven't done an amazing job of. But
why do you think that you haven't effectively accomplished that yet, or like gotten to a point that you're like satisfied with it?
Yeah, so I think that's like the next really big, the really big step for me is what we talked about at Discovery XP, this men's retreat I went to at the beginning of May, was designing your life and designing your day and really writing out your schedule of the things you want to do, not just the things on your to-do list. Because I'm notorious. Well, I used to be notorious for remembering everything, and maybe that's why I have a pretty good memory. But I used to never use a calendar. I would just remember it all. And like,
you got photographic memory?
No, I don't even think.
You don't even have to think about it. Gosh, nice.
And then like I started, like my buddy Mike Rich is always like, dude, I'm so proud of you for using a Google Calendar. And so now I use it, but I've caught myself in the past few months. I'll just solely write my responsibilities, like my job responsibilities, or like a commitment, or like I've got a dentist appointment, but I wouldn't write like write or work out, or I wouldn't schedule my things. So getting back to your question is I've really made it a thing where I'm going to write out on my Google Calendar, literally like everything. Like I'm driving in the car, I'm going to call somebody and I'll put a question mark. If I don't know who it is, I'm going to call to say what's up, or I'm going to work out at this time, or I'm going to record a podcast. I'm going to edit the podcast at this time. And then the other part, which is the most important part, is anchoring Wednesday and anchoring Saturday as a time to reflect back. Did I design my day the way I wanted? And did I actually do it that way? Or did I do it differently? And then basically overlaying that James Clear concept with, am I designing my day and am I designing my week the way I want? And then the Wednesday, the why Wednesday, and the Saturday of reflecting back, is that ultimately it comes back to the question of who am I becoming? Am I becoming the type of person that I wish to become? And who I wish to become is based on the actions and the choices I make. And so getting back to the newsletter, is I'm already learning all these things. So like I would learn all this. Like I'm not even getting paid. Like I'm not getting paid for this. Like I just like podcasts. And I'm like, okay, so I listen to 1 to 4 podcasts a day, probably. And I take notes. So then it's like, cool. I have all these notes and I have all these things that are interesting, and at the expense of my student athletes or some of my friends and family, like I tell them, I'm like, yo, I learned this today. It's freaking crazy. And they're like, cool. Like it doesn't always hit, but I love sharing that with other people. So then using all of those, then I'm like, okay, I have these ideas. So like lifestyle design, like what we just talked about, is going to be an upcoming newsletter, because I just, like yesterday, I was standing in right field with Liam Hatanaka. he is a pitcher on the baseball team, and we were just talking about just like books we were reading and everything. And then he was like, "Oh yeah, I just read this book on how to design your life using design thinking," because he's going to grad school at Cal Berkeley for design, like on using like AI. And we were talking about different ways of like being a professional to like, I don't know the technical terms, but I was like, design thinking, like, what are you talking about? And he was like, how do you, it was like design thinking of like an actual career of design and applying that to how to design your life. And I've just noted, I've tried to be more observant of that serendipity. I'm like, dude, I've been thinking about design in my day for like months.
Just
how did you?
unconsciously.
Yeah, we were just standing out in right
Put it
field in
that
the
way.
sunshine, shagging balls during batting practice, talking about it. So that, and then that's a separate tab in my Notion where I'll just put Ferate 5 and it's like 5 concepts, or it's like 8 concepts because I'll trim the fat. So then, and then that's how I get my newsletter. And then the other part is just like, I'll do 3 things that I enjoyed from the podcast. So like I'll do it for ours, like 3 things that I love that you had me thinking about. And then that's like another one just to blip on people's radar. But it's funny you say consistency, because it's like I'm on my own worst critic. Like even today in my newsletter, I was like, "Sup, everybody, I'm back." And it's like no one noticed, but I was like, "Oh, I missed a week. What's up, everybody?" But I like being honest. I'm like, "Hey, I went to this men's retreat, and then I went to Mexico for this wedding. One of my best friends got married, and honestly, I didn't get one out. So now I'm here. What's up, everybody?" And then
I think everyone can appreciate realness, because everyone's got their own lives, Yeah. And I was reading it going, sick. That's right. Yeah. He was at that men's retreat. I bet Mexico sounds awesome. Like it had me thinking about, just like being able to connect and relate to your realness and authenticity with it. And, I think consistency with yours, and I'd be interested to see, cause I'm like trying to figure out Notion still. Like I continue to build it out a little bit. And so the fact that you use Notion as your like note taking and like system development application, I think is really interesting, because I've just like, similar to you, always jotting down things that are interesting. Like I think I have over 3,000 individual notes on my Apple Notes. And I don't know if that's a lot or if that's a little compared to most people, but I think it's a lot in the sense of what I feel like I've been capturing for the last 10 plus years of listening to podcasts, YouTube videos, learning from other people, conversations that I've had. And like, it's so interesting, Brian. Like I'll go through my notes and like I've been creating content for probably over 10 years, but not sharing it with anybody is how I feel.
Yeah.
Like it was like a realization that I was having. And I'm like, I think these bullet points are super interesting. And I feel like I'm at that point, I felt like a couple of things. Number one, I felt like, wow, I missed out on opportunity to create massive content for a long time consistently, because these are things that I genuinely do, that I have a passion for, it's just is like second nature to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was sick. Let me jot that down in my phone. But then like second bullet point is I feel like I missed out on a lot of opportunities to provide value to people because I didn't share those things. And so, it's like, I keep having this idea in my head of like going away for like a week or 2 weeks or a month at a time, kind of like Matthew McConaughey just went away to write his book, just took his notes, just took no technology. I think maybe I'm making that up, but something along those lines of just like point being getting out and away and just getting so deep into the ideas and the thoughts and just like producing things at like just massive volume, because I feel like everyone's got like books in them, and like including my like just books and just perspectives and ideas and things that we've learned that just aren't being shared. And I just feel like part of the podcast called to share these things. And I think that is part of a struggle I'm having right now also, is like, I want to keep everything super relevant to my life. And I'm also like, wow, with each passing day, those previous thoughts get older and older, and I feel them less and less. But then I go and like read back through them. And so I love the Notion idea of just, I'm trying to use that as a system and capture notes in an effective way to get ideas out in an effective manner. But Yeah, it's a little ramble session, but it's kind of
it's like the Notion thing isn't even for me, it's not even that like fancy. Like really it's just tabs that are kind of organized, like I guess organized into columns. And then the tab, like right now, like when I heard that on the Pogrod podcast, it was like April 15th to the end of April tab. And then everything I listened to. And then like I just did May 23. And now it's every note. And then I have a couple other tabs that are like me pulling information from that month long. I'm not removing it, I'm copy and pasting it. So then I'm like, okay, this was something I think is really cool. It doesn't need to be in this long list, but that's literally it. It's just like a massive list of everything I'm learning. And then I'll put like 3 asterisks or I'll bold it, or as I read back through, I'm like, okay, these really resonate with me. And so it's like super simple. Like anybody listening could just, you could go in your, see, I lose it in my iPhone notes. So that's why I'm like, I have a lot too. So then Notion is kind of like, okay, I have to actively, like intentionally click it to be like, this is for my life. Like iPhone notes, I'll put like random stuff too. I'm like, oh dude, don't forget to pay rent, like randomly on there.
Yeah.
So, or like stuff like that. And yeah, it's like simple. Like if someone just created iPhone notes and was like today is May 17th. So go 17th to through Memorial Day weekend and just write down everything you learned or anything you think was cool or things you're struggling with or whatever. And then it's like, sweet. Now you're in what? June 1st. Okay. Read back, like go for a walk, read it, and then walk a little bit more and then go back to your house and like see what hits. Is like super actionable. Like people could put that into play right now. Dude, you brought up something that I actually really want to ask you. You brought up time because I mean, that was your original question as well. Like I struggle with, like, I don't feel like I'm doing all of them to the best of my ability. Like I wish I had more, or not I wish, but like I need to create more time where I can be like, okay, I'm going to write, or I'm going to do the podcast, or like I'll batch the podcast. Like I'll do 4 in 1 week. And then another week I just like next week, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do a podcast because we're going to the WCC tournament in Vegas. And it's like for baseball or tournament. And it's like, okay, what am I going to bring my mic and everything? And then hit someone up and be like, hey, can you podcast at 10 p.m.? And then I hope our game ends on time. You know, like I don't like putting people in that position. But going back to the time thing, it's like, yeah, you said like missed out, but also I'll summarize it with this. It's like we're both very similar in age. It's like that late 20s, early 30s where you're like, okay, I feel like time's going by pretty fast. So I need to like make the most of this. But also like I have a lot of time still. But then that responsibility is like, not that someone put it on us, but our own responsibility of like, okay, what's the life that I'm really trying to create? Do you ever feel that? Like just.
Do I feel, so the question that I hear is, am I living the life that I want to be living? And am I actively working towards that life that is like my ideal vision? And when I think about time, like I personally feel like each day is an opportunity in itself. And I think that at age 30, I'm 30 years old, and it's that age where
I'm 31. I'm going to be 32 in July.
Happy early birthday here.
Yeah, thanks.
You got me by a couple of years. When I think about where I'm at in life, I think that age 30, I've been able to experience enough in life to realize that time is limited. And I think that I've experienced tragedies and things that come up that are that reminder that, hey, we got this one life to live, and I want to take full advantage of it with people that I love and do things that when I look back on my life, like that life resume is extremely full and meaningful and powerful and impactful, and that it was like lived to the most. And while also keeping in mind that in order to effectively, create that life I want to live, like it does take time consistently day over day. And I also know that, I project my life I project myself to have a whole lot of life to still live. So it's this balance of like knowing that I'm going to have a whole lot of life to put in daily consistent work to build, this life that I'm trying to live, which is like super epic life and meaningful life and positively impacting people while creating just a, rich, experienced, fulfilling life, but also knowing that, hey, like we're not going to have, you never know when your time's going to come either. So it's that fine line of like being at age 30, having gone through experiences, knowing that it's not going to be forever, but also knowing that, okay, like I'm still planning on being here for a long time. So trying to make the most of it. And I don't know if that is like in line with your question, but that's kind of where my head goes with just like thinking about this concept of time. Is that in line at all with what you were asking about?
Yeah. I was just curious because I go through that battle sometimes where I'm like, oh man, I should have started the podcast sooner. Or I wish I would have started my newsletter sooner. Like I'd be so much farther ahead. But also like I wasn't ready. Like I started it when I was ready. Or maybe not fully ready, but like ready enough.
Yeah.
And I started when I was supposed to be. But we talked about this at the men's retreat because like everyone was so shocked that we were there. Like my buddy is 32, so I'm 31, and then like everyone was like, "Whoa!" Like I think there was one other guy that was 27 and one guy was 26, but everybody else was like 36 or older. Like even there was a guy there that was 60, and we were like, "Whoa, you guys are older than us, and you love this stuff? Are you kidding me?" And they were shocked about us, and like me and my buddy we're always thinking like, "Who am I becoming?" Or I guess the time part that I was trying to touch on as well is not only like, oh man, I wish I would have started sooner. It's like, it's like, oh man, I should own like 4 or 5 properties so I have this like additional source of income. Okay, like how do I get there? I need to get these 5. Like, oh, it'd be better if I had 5 units of income, 5 different units paying rent right now. You're like, okay, well, dude, chill out for a sec. Like, pretty impossible to buy 5 property, especially in this market. Like you're not, so I guess that's like that pull of, you're like, I want to become the type of person I want to be right now, but it's hard to become that because you got to get the reps. Like you got to do like the win is in the work also. Like it goes back to it. Yeah. It's like the process of getting there is the win.
And it's also never too late either. Like if you want to do those things, then just go get started too.
Yeah.
Like the perfect time doesn't exist, man, is like one thing that I continue to always come back to. Whether I thought that I waited too long, I'm just, at this stage in life, man, it's like, you know what? Do I wish that I would have started the podcast sooner? Yeah. Do I wish that I would have started, investing in real estate sooner? Yeah. Do I wish that I would have done all these things like sooner? Yeah. Like definitely if I, perfect world, if I could go back and rewrite it, maybe I would change it, but probably not because up to this point, I think that everything has happened exactly how it should. However, that's not to say that if you want to go start something, like go get started with it. You want to get to 5 rental properties, like to get started with saving, $100 this week or like whatever that means to you to actually go and get started. Because then to your point, you are taking those actions that are casting votes for that individual that you do want to become. And when you look back in a year and you actually have that first one under your belt, you're going to realize that was a whole ton of work for one. You're not ready for 5 is one thing that I continue to learn. I'm like, kind of like the 2 steps ahead. There's no chance I need to be Ed Milet right now because my life I would have no control over what is going on. And it's like that slow progression of like, you got to go step by step. And at least that's been my experience. Like, if I were going like, had all that money in the world, like I have had a very natural progression, I would say. And like in retrospect, I'm very glad that it happens that way, because when you continue to put those votes together, like you continue building step by step, level by level, that individual that you are aspiring to become. And so, like what do you, if you were to, if you could like be at some point right now in your life and say you started 5 years ago, like what would you have started 5 years ago if you could pick one thing right now and have put in like 5 years of dedicated work, consistency into it? I know a lot probably comes to your mind with that, whether it's podcast, newsletter. You mentioned real estate. I don't know if it's anything with coaching or even just like a total personal endeavor, or like what is one thing that is top of mind for you when you think about what do you really wish you might have started sooner if you could go back?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the first two that come to mind are the writing the newsletter and the podcast, just because like what I was really like the biggest reason why was for clarity. Like I'd always
like your own clarity.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Writing for sure brings me that.
Yeah. And it was like, I've talked to my friends that hear this all the time, but it's at times I'm like, I would say stuff and people were like, what? And I'm like, hold on, let me say that again. And it's because my brain was like, I felt like my brain was going faster than everything else. So then I started journaling and then like writing. And so I was like, okay, if I want to think clearly, I need to write clearly. And writing is a forcing function for clarity. And if I can think clearly and write clearly, then maybe I can apply that to communicating and speaking clearly. And so then that's why I was like, okay, I'll do the podcast. That will force me to improve in my clarity of my message and my communication and writing, and then thinking through it. And like, that's not just like, oh, I'm going to think about saying that. It's like actually like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk and think on this. And so that was kind of like my thing, to start this and just be more self-aware of myself. So maybe I'd be in a better spot of clarity, but I also, like 5 years ago, I don't think I was in a position, not that like I don't think I'm like world class, but like right now I'm like, yo, I'm in line with what I want to do right now. Where before I don't know if I was necessarily in the space to be like recording, put myself out there in that way, even though maybe I was in some ways. But I feel like I started the podcast and I started the writing at the right time. But I would love, like, I'm excited. Like, I love that you said 10 years. Like, dude, you keep doing it. You keep saying things that I'm like, yeah. How'd you know that I've been thinking that? Because I've been talking to some friends about how I want to keep trying things and finding things that I'm like, yeah, I could do this for a decade, which I found some, like running, podcasting, writing, jiu-jitsu. Like, those are 4 things where when I've done them, I'm like, I could do these for 10 years. Like, let's see, in 10 years will be a good stopping point for me to be like, do I want to keep doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. What would I wish I started 5 years ago?
Well, I think you answered it. You said the writing. To bring you clarity and allow that to feed into clarity of thought, into your communication, into podcast. It sounds like it is, for lack of a better way to put it, your keystone habit, if you will, of like, it's like that one thing and I have found this to be true for myself as well. So like, I completely understand what you're saying about writing brings clarity of thought, which then expands into the outspoken word, whether that's podcast or communicating just with individuals and on an everyday basis. And then that feeds into your IG, your YouTube, or coaching, and just interpersonal communication. And so I completely agree. And I think that you definitely answered it. And the 10-year, the decade-long commitment is something that I don't know if you follow Dan Martell, but he's a guy that I have followed for quite some time now. And I remember listening to one of his podcasts that he talked about a 10-year commitment. He's like, if I'm going to get into something, I'm going to try it out but I'm not going to keep doing it if I can't see myself doing it for 10 years, for a decade. And so that's where that came from. The moment I heard that podcast, I listened to that podcast probably three or four more times. And I had my 30th birthday coming up. And it was one of those things where I started thinking, I'm like, what do I want this 10-year commitment to be? And the podcast was out there.
Excellence.
Like, what am I willing to commit to doing every week for 10 years? Right. And, like, not to span it out over 10, but like, what can I see myself doing each week? Like, what do I want to do? What do I want to, when 10 years is said and done, what will I be most proud of that I did? Or what would I have potentially found the most fulfillment and enjoyment out of, or even another way to look at it is, what would I have regretted not doing? And the podcast was really just that one thing. Well, because I was really between, like, I boiled it down to podcast or YouTube, and the podcast was just something that right in line with the voice. I just knew that I always wanted to do it. And so, my intention was to do the YouTube as much as I could. And I think that the podcast would feed into that. But yeah. And then one day I was so back and forth. I was like, that's it. I'm just doing it. And then so I recorded a podcast saying I was doing it. And I was like, looks like I made my decision. So
let's go.
Yeah. So what about you? Well, so, I mean, you just mentioned 4 things. If you could pick one, you mentioned jiu-jitsu, you mentioned the newsletter, the podcast. What was the 4th? Running. Yeah. If you had to make a public announcement right now on a 10-year commitment, what would you pick?
I think it's not
the
to
newsletter.
Say not to say the exact same thing. It's I just think the writing it's kind of like for you, like YouTube, it's a little bit easier to create on YouTube because you already have the podcast. Like it's like you have that content created through the podcast.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the writing creates the things I'm really interested in. Not creates, but it helps me filter it out. Like, who am I becoming, or lifestyle design, or maybe like, why is lifestyle design maybe a little bit easier than just like goal setting?
Well, it comes back to your curiosities. Like, you're sitting there writing about your curiosities, which are the things that you want to write your newsletter about anyways, and then speak about on the podcast. So it's like that cornerstone for you. It's like that keystone, like I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it is like that. It stems into everything else that you're interested in.
And I would say, like, right there with it is like running and jiu-jitsu are 2 separate components of the same thing. But like investing in my health, like that's something that that's something that I will always invest in. I know like I'll work out, I'll do some kind of workout every day. Like, I'm going to move around and invest, whether it's like I'm stuck in an airport and I'm going to get a bunch of steps, or like whatever that may be. It's investing in my health as well, because it's like, if I can take care of those categories, it's going to make me better. I'm going to have, like, it's hard to have clarity when you like haven't slept and you're not working out. So you
done 75 hard before?
No, I haven't. I just listened to that. There's he was just on the guy who created it was on Danny Miranda's podcast.
Yeah, Andy Frisella. The airport workout. My fiance and I, we've been both doing the program at the same time before, and like our second workout, we were trying to get in, standing in a line at the like trying to get through security, doing our squats and like having our thing going. So,
that's awesome. Did you enjoy the experience?
Yeah, that was something that it took me 9 attempts to finish 75 hard. There were a couple, like 7 times I probably forgot to take a picture one day. So it was never for lack of effort. It was never for, I'm done with this. I was doing a plant-based vegan diet for one of them. And then somehow, some way, some cheese got thrown into this black bean soup dish we had. So I'm like, I'm a very black and white person. So it's like, I got to restart. You either ate the bean cheese or you didn't. So that was another reason. And then, I forget what the other one was, but like the 9th time, finally got it done. But yeah, so basically lived 75 for a couple of years. It felt like,
dang.
Yeah, no, it's solid.
Do you feel like that's a reoccurring theme for you? Is like like putting something out there that's like maybe a few months in advance of like a challenge?
I love a challenge.
Hell yeah.
Challenges force you to be very intentional with what you're doing, is at least in my experience. And or just like having things that you're working towards, whether it's you're training for an Ironman, or you're training for a race and you're training for the specific time, or whether it's, I don't know, do you do competitions with jiu-jitsu, or is that just like an everyday practice and discipline that you would whoop my butt, dude. I got no business being.
I haven't done any competitions. There's quite a few people at our gym that do. I've just trained. Recently I haven't been in because we've been traveling, but I'm about to change that this week. I'll be back in on Friday.
Tonight you're about to change
that. Yeah, tonight. So be ready to roll. But no competitions yet. I think I've signed up. Like I ran a marathon a few years ago.
Nice.
That would be like the planning of it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Hey,
go for it.
Okay, I was gonna ask. Is that challenge? What is it that you love about it? Like, is that challenge for you, or is that like about competing with other people? Or
honestly, man, I love structure, and I love knowing that I have to do things on day in, day out. I just and it provides me structure, and it's within the same realm of all things that I'm super passionate about, which is. And for those that are listening and watching and don't know what 75 Hard is, 75 Hard is a challenge that Andy Frisella created as part of his. It was just a program that he created. It's for 75 days, and you have 2 workouts a day, 45 minutes each. They have to be separated by 3 hours, and one of them has to be outside. And so, whether you consider it's subjective in the sense that whether you consider walking a workout, that's like totally up to the individual. So there's like that aspect to it. There's reading 10 pages of a nonfiction book a day. Again, just love doing it and love having the daily discipline, knowing that I need to get it done. And then you pick a diet. Again, totally subjective. You can choose whatever you want. And so then you take a progress pick and you drink a gallon of water a day. So like that's the challenge in a nutshell. And I guess that I enjoy structure because structure brings me results, is something that I continue to learn. So when I have a plan, when I have a structure to my day, when I have, I know what I am accomplishing that day, like it's laid out for me, I'm very good with that. And so it helps provide me with those things and things that I'm already passionate about. So, have you ever considered doing it? Or I don't. They have like the little app to track it, which is super nice. But there's like, what challenges have you done? If obviously you haven't done that one.
I kind of created this. Josh Bonnetal. Do you know who that is?
No.
He was a performance like strength conditioning coach at Purdue with Purdue men's basketball, and now. I've never met him or talked to him, but I've just like connected with him over Twitter or like followed what he's created. But he is with Future, which is this online like coaching app. Like it's big in like the tech space of I don't know it's like performance coaching, but it's all like through like they give you an Apple Watch. The coach, it's almost like one-on-one coaching, but it's all virtual. And he had posted this thing. It was daily deposit. And he had posted this thing and it was like a ridiculous number. Like he'd worked out every day for 3 years. So the most recent challenge that I've done was the daily deposit, which was work out every single day. And I started that this year and I posted on Twitter for a while. And then I got to a point where I stopped posting the workouts and the pictures. It's all one thread on my Twitter. And at one point, I got to the point where I still did it. I just didn't post the pictures. And then periodically I'd post one and it was like 5 days after. And I was like, well, I'm falling off on the Twitter thing, but I'm not falling off on doing it. And actually this week was my first miss of the whole year. So I made it like 100 and something days in a row. I think I made 126. And
so is that the challenge? Like you just go as long as you can? Is that
yeah, I just was like, oh, I'm going to work out I don't know. I just made it like, I just saw that I was like, dang, this dude worked out. Like he did a workout like 3 years in a row. That's crazy. And like every Wednesday and every Sunday he does hill sprints, and he's done that for like 5 years, I guess. And I just saw that and was like, the daily deposit. Okay, what's my daily deposit? And I would just do a workout every day. And it's whether that was like running or going to jujitsu, or I would do like some strength work, or there was like this body weight circuit that I would always do. It was 30 squats, 25 push-ups, and I started with 5 pull-ups, and I do 5 rounds of that. And you can get through it like pretty quick once you get used to
solid.
it. Yeah, and I would just do that every day. Like there was one point I think I did it for like 20 something days in a row.
You did that same circuit?
Yeah, I would just do that on top of whatever workout. Yeah. So like if I knew I was going to jiu-jitsu, I'd just do it before as like a warm-up. Or I'd do it before a run. But yeah, I most recently, actually, it was the last day of the wedding. It was this last Saturday, and my flight was leaving around 4:00, and I like ended up just like hanging out by the pool and spending time with all my friends. And like I still walked around, but I didn't. I was like, to be honest,
and you couldn't chalk it. You chalked it up to, but you couldn't justify it being a workout.
Yeah, I was like, all right, this doesn't count, so I'm not. I don't count it. And in my mind, I made up. I was like, well, did I really want to be in the gym for 30 minutes while all my friends on the last day of me leaving this wedding and not hang out with my friends? And I was like, okay, maybe that's the little like 2 people on my shoulder. One's convinced me not. And I was like, but I know deep down that I'm going to start that daily deposit again tomorrow. And it's going to be all good. Like,
and you did.
Yeah, I did. Like I've trained since then. And it's like, and I look back and in some way I'm like, oh dude, like you broke the streak. And then the other side of it is like, yeah, but my friends wouldn't have cared, they'd been like, dude, it's all good. Or like I should have just busted out like 500 squats while sitting next to them looking back. But it was just like a learning experience. So I broke it and I'm back on it. So now it's like, what is today is like 130 days. So I'm like 129 for 130. I'm like, cool. If we get to the end of the year and it's 362, like that I worked out, it's like, I'll take that. So that was the most recent challenge.
I might have to join you on the daily deposit. I mean, I'm always doing something, and I feel like I'm at that. And congrats. I mean, good stuff, by the way.
Thanks,
and I think that end of the day, you can always justify. So like, okay, could I have been in the gym? Like, I don't know what time y'all went to bed, but like, could I have made it in the morning and then, done a little workout or something? So then I didn't have to like, end of the day, man, like in that moment, when you look back on your life, when you're 65, man, it's like, that extra little bit of time with like friends and family. I mean, knowing that you're getting back into it that following day and, fresh start, starting something new. And yeah, man, I'm right there with you. So might have to join you though.
Yeah. And it's like, for me, I just made it like, I was like, all right, I'm going to do 20 to 30 minutes, whether that's like me going on a 30-minute run or longer. That's me going to one jiu-jitsu training session. Like I created my own guardrails, right? Like something I've thought about is like, even people just like, cool, like make it 12, like you could do on the minute, 4 rounds, 3 exercises. So that's 12 minutes. And then like on the days you don't do that circuit, you get on the bike for 12 minutes. And it's like, cool, do a 12-minute daily deposit and then like hit me up in a year. Don't miss any days. And it's like, if you don't have a bike, go for a 12-minute walk. Like, it's like we have the time. Like we just got to make the time instead of find it. So and it's like, you don't have to make it crazy. That was my biggest thing with daily deposit. I'm like, all right, if I just work out for 30 minutes every day instead of doing I'm gonna do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday split. It's a 2-hour lift. Like I got to block off it's like, okay, I'm gonna do something like 20 to 30 minutes, maybe an hour or 2 depending on how long a run is or jiu-jitsu or whatever. But yeah, and then it's like, cool, I'm stacking all these votes, like going back to the who am I becoming.
Yeah. But. Question for you.
Yeah.
When you look back on your coaching
career, what do you want to be known for from the players that you coached?
Ooh. Huh. That's a really good question. The first this is fitting that you asked that. I would say okay, so the first thing that came to my mind is that I like deeply and genuinely cared about them.
Yeah.
And like so much. I just deeply care about who they are and who I could help, like I can help them become, like who they can become. Like I want to be able to show them that light that they already have by just like me caring about them. And Chini actually told me this when I was coaching him, and it was cool because I never realized it until he told me. But one day he said, "I really appreciate you, how consistent you are. You're like the most consistent person I've met." And I was like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And he said, "People really appreciate because they know what they're going to get. You're not trying to surprise them." And like super impacted me because it goes back to what we've talked about in this podcast. He put words to something that I was already trying to do, but I didn't realize it. Is I don't want athletes that I work with or anybody that I interact with being like, "Oh man, he's in a mood today," or like you come in and you're like, "Oh," like we've all had those coaches who like one day they like rip you, and then the next day they come up and like try to be buddy with you, and you're like, "Dang, what kind of coach is this?" So I would say just like I deeply care about the individual, like how incredible each individual is, and then I just want them to know that I am trying to each day be like as consistent as possible with being myself and me evolving, right? I can be consistent in becoming a better version of myself. So not that like I'm consistently like I'm never going to change, you know? Like I am changing. Like my identity is evolving and all of that. So that's a really good question. That was a heavy hitter, dude.
Yeah.
Got me.
Well, I know what it means to be a coach. And like when I saw you and the team last night, that was one of the things that I came back and told Shelby, my fiance. I was like, man, I miss the in-person like team structure of being around individuals who are all working together day in and day out through the hard stuff together, being there for like, I came back just pretty fired up and like an eagerness and a yearning for that. And so it was really top of mind for me. You know, I coached for 7+ years, and it's like one of the things that like once I got into my like career that took me up north, you know, it was like I just didn't, I wasn't able to make the time for it that, you know, to where I would be able to show up consistently, you know, and be committed. And so like I wasn't willing to just like partially show up. And so it just was like and I haven't got back into it since. I've done little things here and there, but last night I was like, wow, they got a good thing going. And it was super cool to see, like, you know, even just seeing Zach and seeing like you interact with the team. I was like, damn, I missed that, you know? And so, and I know how it goes, like just wanting to show up for them and like be a role model and care for them. Cause it's like at the end of the day, like you realize those things, or at least for me, like I have realized those things even after the fact, you know, I'm like, damn, like I really did care for him in this way. And like, you don't notice half the impact that you have until they tell you those things and you see it in a totally different light. Cause it's like, you're just showing up being you, you know, like
totally.
So yeah,
that's something that I'm a little nervous about. Like, I'm not sure like, I don't know when that's going to be. I like one of my core values that, or like the sick, like there's these things that I like want to do every day, and I'm not doing all 6, but one of them that I want to do for the rest of my life is coach. And it's maybe not coaching sport or coach. It's just like coaching people is getting people from point A to point B and like helping them understand that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is something I'm nervous about. Like, I just looking back and being like, oh, wow. Like, I'm in a different place. Like, not nervous in a bad way, but it's like, I really do appreciate them more than they appreciate me. And I not that it's a competition, but like, I'm so grateful for the opportunity, because I actually just wrote about it on the newsletter today, but it was like how I'd missed graduation, and I was like, oh, sorry guys, like, I'm missing graduation because I'm going to this men's retreat. And I was like, but it's okay. Like, I cheated. I got to hang out with you every day. Like, your parents wish, like, I had the cheat code. Like, I got to hang out with you 99% of your college career. Like, graduation's for you and your parents. And like, I'll give you a hug when I get back, or, not that graduation isn't important, but it's like, you can celebrate that with them because they wish they could have been a part of your college experience more. I just got the cheat code. Like, I'm your performance coach. So like, not that you had to come, but like, you basically had to hang out with me for 4 years. And, I was like, I got the 99%. So, that's something that, like, even on senior day, like, it's always like emotional for everybody. And I wrote this in the newsletter. But it's like, they get flowers, they get a jersey, they get to walk out with their parents. And I was like, well, I always just try to treat every day like senior day. So then, like, senior day can be fun for you and your parents, but I already celebrated like for 4 years. And it's like, that's something that I want. I hope they feel that, like, looking back, what do I want to be known for? Is like, I celebrated that versus, oh, like, I waited around to like give you a hug till we won the championship, which it's like, okay, I got 4 teams and we're not winning the championship for 8. Like, every year I've been here, it's like, we're not winning that every single year. So
yeah. Good stuff, man.
Dude, this has been sick. We gotta schedule another one soon. I said it's a good reoccurring theme wherein I say this on like every single podcast. I really think it's cool when you have people being able to come back and having part 2s. And I greatly appreciate you. Like, you ask some really good questions and you just get me fired up and I go on these like rants. So I just really appreciate like all your time, and we got to keep connecting on this, because I just feel like there's so many times and you're like, oh, this, I'm like, no way. I feel like I'm it's like, dude, I feel the exact same, or just little bits, not even like, oh, we're working on the same projects, but you'll say something like, whether it was The Voice or like you being from Gig Harbor and I'm from like Silverdale, Seabeck area, and like we know people. I'm like, no way. How do you know? Like, no chance. And it's so many times there's those little bits of serendipity in our conversations. So I just really appreciate you sharing this space on the podcast, man. Totally. This is sick. And I'm grateful that we were able to record this and it be a little time capsule.
Yeah. And I just was coming into it fired up from actually meeting you last night in person before we were able to do this. And, and I just really appreciate your genuine enthusiasm for life and people, man. Like, I could, in a very split second, I think we interacted for 5 minutes maybe. And it was like, just your genuine excitement to see me was really cool. And it was something I was telling, like, I literally called my buddy and left him a voicemail at 9:30 last night, because I was just fired up to be around, like, just positive energy. And so, like, I mean, the list goes on about, things that we are connected on and connected with. But I mean, we'll have a part 2. I would imagine a part 3 and 4, and doing live and get an in-person session going, and
that'd be
get out to Portland, go run around. And I know you're trying to get off the jiu-jitsu right now, so maybe you'll have to break my leg one of these days or something.
Dude, that'd be sick. We'll set up
that'd be sick.
Oh no, I meant everything else. We'll set up We'll get a camera going. We'll set up an in-person pod.
Dude, that'd be awesome.
Record it, smash a run, get some good Portland food.
Yeah.
And, especially with this weather right
throw it
now.
up on YouTube.
Yeah, that'd be sick. That'd be sick. That's the next step for me. I hope to build out my YouTube of just like posting more of these podcasts. Like, actually, like you're killing it, man. Like that's something I was looking at. I'm like, yo, these are sick. Like just editing them all and the.
Well, I'm glad you think so. I'm like, wow, is this a lame video? I'm like, just post it, dude. It's like I always try to go back to Mr. Beast. You know, he's like, just keep doing one thing differently each time. Keep doing one thing better each time. And then after you've done 100 reps, it's going to be so much drastically better. Right. And so I just try to keep that top of mind. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to do one thing differently. And organically, it comes out similar with the podcast and everything. So yeah man, we'll do it again. We'll run it back.
Yeah. Crazy that Mr. Beast is just talking about YouTube videos, but he could apply that to anything else, you know?
Anything, man.
Yeah. But all right. Well, I appreciate you. We'll cut it off right here. And dude, cheers to 10 years of creating some art and
I'm doing this right here.
Yeah, can't wait till part 2 gets rolling.